Hello class, in today's lecture we are going to continue with our unit on Hebrew poetry. And so we're actually going to talk about the book of Song of Songs, sometimes known as the Song of Solomon. We're going to call it the Song of Songs. It is an entire poem. It's a love poem. And in fact, it focuses on romantic love. It's actually a little bit scandalous, so to speak. And in fact, if you were raised in the Jewish faith, for historical purposes for the Jewish people, this book was not allowed to be read by young children. In fact, you had to enter through what's called your bar mitzvah or your bat mitzvah if you were a girl at that age, about 12, 13, that you're actually now kind of in adulthood. And one of the rites of passage is you are now able to read this book on your own because it's sort of it's scandalous, all right? But you're about that age, and so we're going to talk about it and talk about some of its content. First and foremost, this book, it celebrates sexuality, the way that God intended and created it to be in a marriage sort of situation. It's this couple that is about to get married, and so their desire for one another, which is, you can understand why maybe this book was not allowed to be read by young children. Its view of love is consistent with other parts of the Bible and the way that love and sexuality is sort of represented as sort of a gift from God, and is meant to be appropriately addressed in the bonds of marriage, in that covenant. There's a phrase, Song of Songs. It's actually from the Hebrew expression meaning a great song. So it's sort of a, whenever you say the Song of Songs, it's meaning that it is the ultimate love poem in the Bible. Now, there was probably a lot of other love poems at the time, but this is considered the Song of Songs. That's why it's in our scriptures. It's traditionally attributed to the writer Solomon, King Solomon, and it's not necessarily wisdom writing. It's more of just his poetry style. He also contributed a lot of the Psalms. Of course, he wrote Ecclesiastes probably, and some of the Proverbs and so on. So we're not unfamiliar with his work that we've talked about so far. Early Jewish scholars and Christian scholars also understood this as an allegorical book. An allegory is sort of like a story that represents something else, like something within that story, maybe a symbol or something like that that represents something bigger. For early Jewish scholars that followed this sort of allegorical method, they interpreted this as God's expression and love for Israel. So the love that the groom has for the bride is that love that God has for Israel, and that's how they understood it. Now, that may be accurate, that may not be, but that's how oftentimes this was read. Early Christians understood that this is Christ's love for the church, and so that's how oftentimes people have understood and interpreted these books. Better way to, honestly, I think, to look at this is a list of love songs, right? It's a collection of multiple poems and really are songs that were meant to be sung as a sort of way to express love for one another. And these songs are oftentimes are used at weddings and so on. Even at my own wedding, we had a Song of Songs. And so they're not all just romantic, mushy-gushy, whatever, but they're just a really great expression of what it means for people, men and women, to be in love and that bond of marriage and that covenant. The content utilizes a large number of images, drawing from nature, right, of gardens, of animals, of perfumes, of spices, of trees, and so on, all kinds of just crazy sort of imaginative sort of ways. And that's why oftentimes these are understood as allegorical, right? The first two chapters alternate between the woman and the man. In these songs, the woman sings of her love, and then the man responds by praising her beauty. All right, so there's this back and forth, and that continues on and on. We're going to move on to the Lamentations, and we've talked about laments before. In the Song of Songs, laments, not Song of Songs, but in Psalms, laments are these cries out to God for help. Now this book, this entire book, was written, in fact, to address the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And so it's a cry out to God for what has happened to the temple and to Jerusalem itself. Such laments were part of religion. I mean, when you think of your worship services, you probably don't oftentimes think of crying out to God for help. But I mean, we're in this time right now, right? Where it's a great time to say, God, let's be honest. there are things to lament, there are things to cry out for, not just happy, happy, joy, joy, put a smile on your face and just fake it until you make it kind of thing, but there are things to lament about. And so this is part of the scriptural narrative, right? That God is saying, listen, I am a big God and I want to hear what's on your hearts. Be honest with me and I will come alongside you and I will hear your cry. Now, most scholars understand that Lamentations is probably anonymous. It could be Jeremiah the prophet. He also saw the destruction of the temple and so on. Traditionally, this book was believed to be written right around 587, right around the time that the actual Jerusalem walls and city were destroyed by the Babylonians. And so the book is made up of 5 carefully crafted structural poems that utilize a lot of metaphors. And so the book begins with a lament from the desolation of Jerusalem and God's withdrawal from his people itself, and sort of what has to happen in Babylon. Like Job, the author complained to God about his suffering. He didn't just keep it bottled up and just internal. He expressed it to God, and he understood, as opposed to Job, though, however, they know why all this is happening, because Job says, I'm innocent, right? He's like, there's no reason why this is happening. For the author of Lamentations, he's honest enough to say, listen, I know why this is happening, and it's because of Israel's rebellion and their sin. All right, that's going to do it for today. I know we've covered a lot between these 2 books, but it all goes in with the whole idea of Hebrew poetry. And so hopefully that has kind of given us a good conclusion of a good snapshot of what Hebrew poetry is all about and how it is expressed in the Bible. All right, that's going to do it for now. Until the next one.